your diplomas. Recording in progress. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So there is a tendency to attach great importance to your certificates, diplomas, and the like. A tendency which, for our purposes here, I find not entirely satisfying. So let me just say that I know a thing or two about systemic functional linguistics, also a thing or two about systemic functional grammatics, which is not to be confused with grammar. These are different things, and perhaps we'll discuss them later. And also, I'm not only a theorist, but also a practitioner, which SFL is all about. SFL is about applicable linguistics, which you don't simply study or write about, which you apply. And I'm applying it every single day in my linguistic, translatorial, and even remote simultaneous interpreting jobs, as strange as it may seem. So that's it.
Wonderful. Welcome. Well, today we're focusing on the circumstances, which is a part of the field, and field, tenor, and mode are the three main variables in the context of situation, which is part of the larger context of culture. And field is has been translated or explained in more everyday language as subject matter, or the content, or the topic of the conversation. So anytime we have a conversation, we talk about something, whether I was talking about the winter storm that has that's taking place now here, I'm choosing the language, then the participants' processes and circumstances that represent this field or this topic that I'm talking about. We will talk about tenor, which is can be retranslated or recontextualized as, sorry, I'm continuing to admit people, as relationships between people, the audiences with whom we communicate, and the social power between people. All of those construe different meanings or influence the choices that we make, and also how we communicate. The channel of communication is the mode. So these three are main variables that we will be unpacking each time we meet, and they comprise the language system. Outside of it is the context of culture, which is the context of culture at large, in which we find ourselves: historical context, the time frame, the events that surround us. It's a big C culture. In it, and also the purpose and genre are part of that layer of context. And we often, this is kind of my mantra about SFL, is it's a meaning-making, dynamic, not static system of choices in context. Language is not an inventory of structures. It's a quick overview of how SFL represents language system. Very, very brief. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's what does it matter then that it's a system of choices in context? Like, so what are the implications for teaching? And when we teach using systemic functional linguistics, first of all, we always pay attention to context first. We don't enter into the teaching with the inventory of structures. We enter with the context, and we understand that if it's a meaning-making system, then we teach language systematically within that context and not randomly as an inventory of structure. This one kept me up at night. It caused the most cognitive dissonance because I grew up with, or I was taught Chomskyan grammar and structural grammar. And when context entered my space of thinking, that caused a lot of cognitive dissonance. Another reminder is that we don't throw away structures. We look at how structures map onto meanings and what meanings they construe. So again, the field is comprised of these three variables. Participants, we covered who or what, the probe questions, not always noun group, but the main one. Processes are the verbal group, what's happening, and circumstances is what we're looking at today, is the adverbial group, or realized through prepositional phrases typically, nominal phrases occasionally, and answers question when, how, where, why, and others. So I would like to hand this off to Andriy. It's a great visual to represent the field.
A great visual, thanks to Halliday and Mathieson, who revised Halliday's fundamental introduction. Let me just add a couple of words to what Ruslana has just said regarding language as a meaning-making resource. I think if you're not familiar with this fully functionalist definition, you are well familiar with the age-old dictum, sometimes thought of as a dogma, that language as a means of communication. Apart from the fact that this is a tautological definition, it has a grain of truth in it. As you might remember from structural accounts, language is perceived, is conceptualized as a code sent and received between two participants, the sender and the receiver. The way which is used to pass on this code back and forth is what is known as mode in our brand of grammar. What is known as field instead is the conceptual meaning of what is said or written. It doesn't matter. That is things we are talking about. And finally, the last component, called the mood in our grammar, deals with the participants, with those who are engaged in the process of interacting, which is to say that systemic functional grammar is the most complete way of seeing both the conceptual core of what is said and those who say it, together with the code that they use for sending and receiving information. This is a structural take on the situation. Now, let's get down to business and talk about central and peripheral elements in the clause structure. Please have a look at the sentence or the clause, the simplex clause on the left. Sirko got the wolf into the house quietly. What can we make out of this one? First of all, we can figure out the process, the core around which everything revolves. The core here is God, realized by the verbal group. Then we have those who revolve around this process in the direct vicinity, so to speak. And here we have Sirko, who does the getting, and the wolf, who is the receiver of this getting, who is the beneficiary, we might say. These two elements are, roughly speaking, enough to get the general idea, or to make the sentence grammatical, as a Chomskyan grammarian would say. But here we have something different. We have something which builds upon the information provided by the process and the participants, namely into the house quietly. We all remember and understand what these two groups and phrases do. They build on the information provided by the verbal group and add something else, add attendant circumstances, as one might say. There are two pieces of information which we receive through this outer circle of circumstance. Into the house, which locates the happening in some place, and also the manner in which the process of getting unfolds, that is, manner and quality. So please keep an eye on these labels of location and manner. We'll need them later on. As this diagram usefully suggests, though, circumstances are in a way peripheral. They build upon the process and participants, and can be regarded as a sort of a minor process. You see, when we take the phrase into the house, we understand that something is going on here, which is not simply static, which is moving, but not in an obvious way. Look at the preposition into, which implies movement. So in systemic grammar, it is often said that circumstances represent minor processes as opposed to major processes which are represented by verbal groups. Could you please move to the next slide?
So on this slide now, what you're seeing are the different types of circumstances that exist and the meanings that they realize, the time, place, manner, accompaniment, matter, cause, contingency, role, and angle, and the questions that through which they're answered, or the questions that are being answered, and then examples here. So first is that not all circumstances are just about location or time. That's an entry point into the conversation through location and time. Those are kind of very common. We recognize them, we use them a lot, but there are other types. This is from Sally Humphrey, Louis Droga, and Susan Fees from 2012, Grammar and Meaning book. If you're interested, I can provide you with like a Google Doc where you can have this table available to you. So you don't need to take copious notes or, screenshots. And so just some types, the meanings, the questions, and the examples that provide that information. Often there is quite a bit of detail that lives in circumstances. So when students are asked to add details or to be more specific about their meanings, then they are often represented through circumstances, not only, but in many cases, other details are represented in noun groups, in the expanded noun groups, within pre and post modifiers. So anything, Andriy, you want to say about this table?
Yes, thank you, Ruslana. The table, a useful one, but necessarily simplifying things a bit. So let me just give you a small indication of where to look for additional information. Now, you see here some labels such as time, place, manner, etc., which to the uninitiated may seem rather random. In fact, they are not random and fall neatly into as one of the systems in systemic functional grammar. What this table doesn't show, and it's not a bad thing, but it's simply not showing it. All these meaning types fall neatly into four large categories, the categories which permeate many grammatical systems of English and other languages. And for the sake of the record, let me just name these large groups. The first group is called enhancement. These are enhancing circumstances, such as time, place, etc. They enhance the process with additional details, like Jem fed the cat after breakfast. From this, we get to know that the feeding of the cat occurred after breakfast, so it's enhancing in a way. Next, we have a group of circumstances known as extending circumstances. I'm not sure if I can find this here. Oh, yeah, that's it. Have a look at accompaniment. Who, what with, and who, what else. Platypus swam in the creek with his friends. This is not an enhancement per se, but rather an extension. We find out who these additional participants were, indirect participants, let me note, who these indirect participants were that took part in the process of swimming. Thirdly, we have elaborating circumstances, which provide us with the information about the role and broadly answer the question, in which capacity? Yeah, there we have it. What as? He came as a clown. As a clown elaborates on the way of his coming. And finally, we have projecting circumstances, which deal with points of view, information according to somebody, etc. Yeah, this is called angle here, according to whom. And that's pretty much it. Four broad categories: enhancing, extending, elaborating, and projecting. So that's it with this slide. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Wow, corpus findings.
Mm-hmm.
Can I start, right?
Yeah.
This slide was taken with minor additions and enhancements from the famous law and grammar of spoken and written English. I first got this one in its abridged student edition, but here is the whole thing. So just for further information, let us have a look at how the circumstances of place, time, manner, and contingency are distributed across the lawman corpus of spoken and written English. As you know, the corpus, although not exactly a record breaker, is a very reliable source for all things English vocabulary, grammar, or lexicogrammar, as we might say. So in conversation, time and place are almost equally the most common. And I think we have a linguistic explanation to that. As we remember, in conversation, something known as deixis takes place, which means that when we talk to someone, we proceed along the lines of me, here, and now, in order to specify the now or some other time in relation to now, and some place in relation to here. We necessarily need circumstances, and this is reflected in the corpus. In fiction, place, process, and time are all frequent, following that order. Here we see an interesting phenomenon. We see the addition of process, which is completely understandable given the nature of fictional narrative, which wants us to see with our own eyes through the text and get access to the extra textual fictional reality created by it. So we have process, a necessary component. Then in news, we have time as the dominating circumstance, followed by other ones, which is also perfectly understandable and again invokes the notion of deixis, here and now. And finally, the academic prose is mainly interested in the phenomena characterized by the characterization of phenomena. So process is the headliner here. I think we can move on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Unless there are any questions that you want to either drop in the chat or ask.
Yeah, questions, objections, suggestions, anything. Okay.
Yeah, you're invited to drop them in the chat anytime during the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So, one second. What's important to know about circumstances is that they are most, there are several things. There is no fixed position for a circumstance. They can be moved around. However, meaning changes based on where it's placed in a sentence, and I'll show you a few examples coming up. It's a really, I've done this work in third grade classrooms where students take the circumstances from the end of the sentence and place them at the beginning, and they talk about how the meaning shifts and how they're most mobile. In the noun group or the participant will stay and the process will stay fixed in English, but the circumstances are quite mobile. In circumstances play different roles in different genres, and I'll show an example of a procedure, for example, as contrasted with a historical account, and how the type and the meanings that circumstances construe are different based on different genres. Their grammatical form, another important thing to know is that their grammatical form varies. They can be, most common are prepositional phrases. That was my entry point into circumstances. I could see prepositional phrases, but not every prepositional phrase is a circumstance. So we'll take a look at that too. Noun groups are like last weekend or this morning. I woke up to 25 below zero. Prepositional phrases are common and typical, as I mentioned earlier. Adverbs and phrases according to, due to, until, because of. And then I'll repeat that not every prepositional phrase is a circumstance, and it kind of depends on the participant first. So here are some examples of circumstances that show that they are realized through different grammatical structures. Here is blue is prepositions, circumstances of time. Yellow are circumstances of place, and that other color, salmon color, I think they call it in American English, is manner. So in time, mostly are prepositional phrases with an adverb, and place, there is also a circumstance, a prepositional phrase and a prepositional phrase, and manner is prepositional phrase and adverb. Here are some sentences that I found from the genre of a historical account about Taras Shevchenko. I believe in teaching English language through the content that's relevant to me. I was taught English language by talking about Meaborio jaguar, and I didn't know what jaguar was for many years, and it was irrelevant to me. So I've changed the way I approach the teaching of English language about the content that matters to me and that's important to me and my students. So that's a little side note. So here is an example of that. Circumstances can be moved around. You can say Taras traveled to Vilnius, Lithuania in the spring of 1829, or in the spring of 1829, Taras traveled to Vilnius, Lithuania. I'm putting here the color coding. This is typical systemic functional linguistics color coding. Circumstances are in blue, the participants are in red, the processes are in green, and we use this to mark the different structures and clause type components. And then the structures through which they are realized are here on the bottom row. So these are the different examples. If you, back to that comment I made earlier, that if you place something at the beginning of the clause, you emphasize it as more meaningful. So in this case, the time is meaningful. In the spring of 1829, often in historical recounts, to create a chronology, for obvious reasons, the time will be introduced first. If you want to emphasize that it was Taras Shevchenko who traveled, then you would start with talking about him and not, because if the chronology is created through people and not through time, then you have, you talk about people first. Taras traveled, his father joined him, etc., just making things up as examples. So that's kind of an example of where you can move this to the end and the meaning won't change. The meaning will change, I'm sorry. Here is another example from a narrative. It's a fictional narrative. The owl at the beginning landed on the tree branch right outside the magic tree house. And if you put, if you move the blue to the front, then you are privileging, you are emphasizing the location and not the who or the what. So the movement of circumstances should be also part of the conversation when you talk about the meaning and the movement together, not just grammar for the grammar's sake. That's the point of this, we always pursue the conversation about meanings with students and how they impact the clause and how the movement of structures creates different meanings. So here is another sentence from, could be an informational report. There is background noise. If you could please mute yourself. In our country, where, and here is an expanded noun group, the participant, rows of fragrant cherry trees bloom everywhere in April. Again, you could move around circumstances to create different meanings and to create cohesion in different ways. One more. Softly after dawn, under a brilliant clear blue sky. Shortly after dawn, under a brilliant clear blue sky, softly the chanting began. And I picked the sentence on purpose because the participant is realized through a gerund and not a noun group, which is really fun to do in writing. or when you choose different structures to represent the what or the who in the clause. And as you can see, there is so much circumstantial information here at the beginning of this clause, with when and where and how, everything positioned in the front. And moving it around and creating sentences like these with your students in the context of the genre that they're learning. Yes.
Ruslana,
Yes,
if I
Andrei.
may, just a couple of words about this example here, shortly after dawn. It illustrates a very useful stylistic device called stacking. One of the names is stacking, where you pile circumstances one on top of the other in the frontal position in order to create a scenery where some action unfolds. The chanting here, and the action here is you have said is represented by a verbal noun, which is kind of a grammatical metaphor, by the way. So this sentence in particular is full of very useful grammatical and stylistic devices.
Thank you for that comment. Yes, we could get into grammatical metaphor in more detail. That would be very useful, I think. So there are other important things. They're almost called like little pitfalls, where you decide whether a phrase is a qualifier in a noun group or it's a circumstance. I remember this experience of learning when I started systemic functional linguistics myself back in the day, and it was kind of a stumbling block for me, like, wait, not every prepositional phrase is a circumstance. And in this case, the red indicates the participant, and it's a particular participant in the hikers in the national park. It's a participant in the national park is not a circumstance in this case, because it specifies the type of hikers. It answers the question who and is a participant. Example 2, where you take the same prepositional phrase in the national park, and you say summer forest fires are a hazard in some national parks. The answer is where, and it is a circumstance. So that's something kind of cool to keep in mind as you identify participants and circumstances. Another example is deciding whether it's a circumstance that in this sentence, the planet is in trouble because of global warming. It's a circumstance of cause. It answers why. However, and this came from my conversation with Andrei, where I was not sure, and he was really helpful. When you have a dependent clause, in this sentence, the planet is in trouble because we use too much energy. It's a dependent clause. It does answer why, and it's not a circumstance because it's not part of it's basically an additional clause, even though it does answer the same question why. You have more information here with a participant and a process and more participant. So this one gave me some pause to think about. Is there something you would add, Andrei, in order to distinguish these two examples more clearly?
Yeah, Ruslana, thank you.
Yes.
Remember at the beginning, we said that what we are looking at in this session today are simplex clauses, also known as clause simplexes or just simple clauses, that is, прості речення. You see,
Yeah.
due to the nature of our sessions, we started sort of from the middle of the whole architecture of this theory. If you go to the basics and open chapter 1 of this little book here, you will find out that when we speak, we not only utter sounds which we turn into syllables, then words, phrases, etc. When we speak, we construe experience in a certain way. This means we receive some flow of information and turn it or interpret it so that to make sense of it. So every sentence we utter is called a figure from this point of view of language philosophy, a figure which reflects the way we understand the experience we are talking about. And when we talk in figures, we only need one process, a set of participants to accompany this process. By the way, you might remember these participants under the name of actanti in traditional structural grammar. So we need these things. And we also might need circumstances, and that's it. These three components, two obligatory ones and one optional, are enough to construe a figure of experience. What we see here in example 2 are in fact two figures. We first talk about the planet. We make some statement about the state of affairs concerning the planet. And then we make some statement about the state of affairs with energy in the dependent clause. So these are two figures, not one. And today we're only discussing one figure for the sake of simplicity. Although there are some more complicated processes at work. And if you keep going, you will find out that something called circumstantiation affects both elements of the simplex and the complex clause. The complex, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Surprise.
Love it.
Yeah, this one is mine. I added that a
Thank
couple
you.
of hours ago. Sorry for not warning you about that, but I thought
No
it would
problem.
be nice, especially for those colleagues who are interested in the advanced level of understanding something we call systemic indeterminacy. If you open any textbook on theoretical practical grammar published in Ukraine, including those contemporary ones published in the last decade, you see that everything is very clearly and neatly compartmentalized into distinct categories. That's not true. We don't want that. It's not happening in real life. What is happening is systemic indeterminacy. And one example you can see in the section from 3 to 14. At the top, these are most participant-like functions, and at the bottom, most circumstance-like functions. To give you an idea, which can be found in many systemic functional textbooks. When you have range, you have sentences like, they play tennis. To give you the simplest example, they play tennis. Tennis can be analyzed as a participant, because we do what? We play, what do we play? We play tennis. The probe gives us tennis. But at the same time, it has many circumstantial overtones. And there are certain analyses and certain probes and also certain propositions, like we play at tennis with at in brackets. can find this example in some sources. So we play at tennis, where this element displays clearly circumstantial characteristics. So from 5 to 6, you have this gray zone, and you have a very good example of indeterminacy, the fact that almost nothing in language is clear-cut, which is another proof that formal logic and formal semantics, which I absolutely hate, to tell the truth. Yeah, formal semantics is manifestly not enough to describe human languages in the full sense of the word. So that's it from me.
That's one thing about systemic and functional linguistics that has, I could summarize what you said in a way that I relate to, is that through this word indeterminacy, that language is so dynamic, and you can use any resource to do different grammatical resources to do different things with. One of the examples that is kind of making my brain explode is how a noun, evaporation or condensation on my window from the storm, the word condensation, which is a noun, which is supposed to be participant according to structural grammar, let's just imagine, it actually communicates a process. It communicates a physical action that's happening on my window. And it's done through a noun versus a verb. So that's my example and my connection to indeterminacy. You can use noun to communicate action. And that one just gives me a lot to think about, and it kind of causes a little brain explosion, as I call it. So thank you for that. We have about 3 minutes left. I'll share a few examples. We can go over a few minutes more. My kids are here in the other room waiting for mom to come out and make more Christmas cookies. So I'll probably take us through maybe 5 or 10 minutes after the hour, if that's okay with you. So in terms of this practical, coming down from the abstract theoretical into the practical, the world of systemic functional linguistics, circumstances have specific functions depending on the genre. And here's an example of, in procedural texts, the circumstances of manner, place, and extent help make instructions more precise. And here's an example. In the blue, sorry for too much text on this slide. We're going to focus on the blue first, the blue rectangle. So you have your circumstances in blue, and yeah, the temperature is in Fahrenheit. This was written for an American teacher audience. So you have manner, place, circumstances that have a very specific function. If you don't know how many degrees to preheat the oven to, the precision that's communicated through circumstances is critical at this point. Otherwise, your cake is going to collapse. And it specifies where to mix together the flour and baking soda and salt. And some new cooks don't know where to mix them, I guess. Sometimes it specifies it's a medium-sized bowl, because then down the road you're going to use a large-size bowl, and it's extremely important that the size of bowl is specified, because if you put the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients, the right size bowls, you're going to have a mini disaster. So the precision is very much the meaning and the function of circumstances in recipes. They are critical for a successful product. And if you put them at the beginning, again, it gives them more prominence. And it's kind of important. I love the circumstances at the beginning to when I read the new recipes when I bake. In narrative, circumstances are often used to help the reader visualize the story setting and provide more information about the characters and more details about the events and where and how events take place. I actually had I wanted to play this story to you but we're running out of time. I can share the PowerPoint. It's just a lovely, warm feeling, fuzzy feeling kind of a story about Kitten's first moon. And the circumstances in this story are charming because the kitten thinks this is a bowl of milk in the sky, and he continues to pursue this bowl of milk and with a lot of frustration, but then he ends up getting a bowl of milk at home. So how the kitten pursues this bowl of milk through the story is communicated through gorgeous circumstances. And some of the work I've done in second grade classrooms with children who are new to the United States, don't speak English yet, and speak other languages, is that we would just focus on all of those circumstances and just focus on the meanings that they create and where the kitten is moving through the location and how he's moving through the how he's jumping and where, when, and how were the main 3 types of circumstances. So I invite you to listen to this story, and if you work with younger children, it's lovely and relatable. It kind of spans cultures, I think. Here is our favorite, I'm assuming, the mitten. It was translated in Canada, and there is a reason why I'm bringing this up. So I invite you to find a couple of circumstances that you see on the slide in the mitten, the folktale mitten, and drop them in the chat as you find them. If you are unable to see the screen, I will read it to you. A little mouse scurried by and found the mitten laying on the ground. Squeak, squeak, she said. Who is in the mitten? But no one answered. The mouse thought to herself, well, then I will live here. And she climbed into the mitten. So into the mitten is one simple circumstance there. And the mitten lying on the ground, I wonder if it's a participant, Andrei.
This one is complicated.
Okay, tell us what makes it complicated.
Because lying on the ground is in itself a figure. So we might as well be trying to locate a circumstance inside this figure. But at the same time, lying on the ground means being on the ground. So this is a, you know things. This is a relational process, I suppose.
So a relational process would include information about where it's laying? Okay.
So it is on the ground, yes. So I think we should leave this one out of discussion for a while.
Okay. We'll come back to it when we're ready for it. There is more circumstances in this presentation in a genre of historical recounts. They rely on circumstances of time to create a timeline. and sometimes they're strategically placed at the beginning of sentences to create a sequence in a clear timeline. And circumstances of place add detail about the location of historic events. Here is a text from Taras Shevchenko's life, and it was written in a Canadian museum for Taras Shevchenko. And let's find some circumstances here of place and time.
Time we have on March the 9th, place the village of Morenci.
Morenci, that's 30 minutes from where I was born. Proud of Shevchenkivsky Krai. Thank you.
So the participants, we have parents, and the place we have the land of Vasily.
And Engelhard.
You can pronounce it. Should we continue?
In 1823, in
Yes,
1825, for some time at 14. So here are some, I'll just keep going. I wanted to highlight a very extended nominal group here in red, because all of that information is that part of that nominal group. And then the circumstances here are in blue. And then here is more circumstances in blue. And that this would be an opportunity for you to take, since it's past the hour, I wanted to give you an opportunity to explore different genres and study their functions, study the functions of circumstances in different genres. So going back to Sirko folktale and looking at the circumstances there and what role do they play, and then finding a different genre, such as a recipe or historical account or a narrative, and a different kind of narrative, and talk about circumstances that in that genre and what role do they play there. So I would like to actually take a minute to hear from you by either dropping in the chat or unmuting. How can this knowledge be applied in your context? And I know your contexts are extremely diverse, from university level to schools. And if you're interested in information about circumstances presented by my colleagues at some Canadian universities, they apply the knowledge of circumstances in higher education courses. I will send you that recording. Okay, I'll send you that recording in Viber. If you, this concludes our presentation, and if you have a few thoughts of how this information can be applied to you, I would love to hear from you now, or drop it by unmuting yourself or dropping in the chat. And I'm going to stop recording. Oops, sorry.
Сейчас